How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on Tuesday, July 16th. We're getting closer to football. Today, some more teams had their rookies report for their first days of training camp. Football is right around the corner. To go along with that exciting news, I got some exciting stories to get to on today's episode. A lot of breaking news sort of today. Brandon Aiyuk that is, requested a trade officially from the San Francisco 49ers. We're going to get into that in the first segment. Then we are going to be reacting to ESPN's top 10 quarterbacks that they released a few days ago. Then also we're going to talk about Derrick Henry signing, obviously, with the Baltimore Ravens, why the Ravens feel that they could still get the best version of Derrick Henry despite him being 30 years old, and the running backs and the narrative around them as they go into their later years. Scares away a few teams, but the Ravens have a good response to that. Those topics and more coming up on today's show. Before I get started, please remember, if you have any questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, that you see there on your screen. By using that link, I'm able to see your question. It'll pop up in my chat box. I'll read it on air, and that way we can maybe swing the conversation a different way. Just get your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of the topics. It's a big help for the show and the network as well. So if you guys would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, whenever you feel the need to say something based on what I say or on the topics. But with the biggest news coming out of the NFL today, Brandon Aiyuk has officially requested a trade from the San Francisco 49ers. I don't want to say I told you so just yet, because this, for me, means a lot, but it could also mean not too much, just based on the reality of everything, because according to NFL Media's Mike Garafolo, he was the first one that I saw reported on this topic and said that obviously Aiyuk requested a trade today from the San Francisco 49ers, and in his tweet, he said, After an offseason of unsuccessful attempts to reach an extension, despite a recent meeting, the Niners haven't been willing to engage in negotiations since May, so Aiyuk has respectfully asked out, and that's pretty shocking. I didn't really know it was since May, but according to Mike Garafolo, the negotiations haven't really moved that much since the month of May, and it is surprising, but also I've been on this show talking about how I feel pretty confident, pretty adamant that I don't think this is going to get resolved. And you can only imagine if you're Brandon Aiyuk trying and saying publicly that you want to be a 49er, ideally you want to stay here, but they're not reciprocating that same energy. You know, if they're not really pushing towards anything further since about 2-3 months ago, you're starting to feel, if you're Brandon Aiyuk, like, all right, this isn't really going anywhere. At what point do you realize that you're almost wasting your time if the other side isn't really reciprocating that same energy? So I'm not too surprised that Aiyuk requested a trade. That being said, it could be used as a ploy also on the other side to just apply more pressure to still stay with the 49ers. But I think this has some deeper meaning to it, not just as another ploy for Brandon Aiyuk to maybe just apply some pressure to the 49ers. I really think that we have reached a milestone here with Brandon, just because this comes during the week of the 49ers starting their training camp. Their rookies, the rookie class, and all the new players actually reported at training camp today, and the veterans aren't supposed to be there until next Tuesday, a week from today on July 23rd. So you have a week now where you're really going to get into the full swing of things, and with Brandon Aiyuk to really sound the alarms everywhere, and sound the alarms not just for the 49ers if that was his main goal with all of this, but for everybody else around the NFL, that, you know, it's come to a point right now before training camp where I'm saying I'm really now publicly looking for other options outside of the 49ers. Because before, why I think this is so important is because before, if you recall that Pivot podcast that I talked about and some of the quotes he said, it was, ideally, I want to say with the 49ers, this is where I want to be, but if I had to choose, I'd go to the Steelers or I'd go to the Commanders. I'd love to play with Jaden Daniels, something like that. But it was always rooted in the fact that his first option was the 49ers, but now I feel like Aiyuk has come to this point where it's not looking promising. He has not gotten the same level of hope and enthusiasm really from the 49ers to pay him what he feels his value is at. So now he's sounding the alarms for everybody in the NFL to maybe not only get the 49ers a better sense of urgency, but for other teams to say, all right, now he's thinking about moving on. He's requested a trade. His first option might not be to stay with the 49ers. Let's pick it up here and start approaching the 49ers with our trade offers, because now they don't feel like they're wasting their time, right? Now their hopes might be reignited that Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers are really not going to come to an agreement on a contract extension. So now you have more teams that need a wide receiver approaching the 49ers. So I think right now where this stands, again, I mentioned before that it means a lot for all those reasons that I just mentioned, but it could also not mean too much because, as you would have expected, ESPN's Adam Schefter reported right after the news dropped that his sources say that the 49ers still have turned down teams trying to inquire about a trade for Brandon Aiyuk. They're very reluctant to trade him. They're not looking to trade him, even though he has requested a trade. They don't find it in their best interest to do that. And it is a similar case, or was a similar case, I should say, with Deebo Samuel a year or two ago when he was trying to get his contract extension done, but it wasn't really moving too progressively with the 49ers. So he also requested a trade. If you want to go further back, Robbie Gould, their former kicker, also requested a trade, but both of those situations ended up with both players staying with the 49ers and getting their contract extensions. So you look at that situation, and this is almost following very similarly to those two. So if you're a Niners fan, if you're anybody following this situation, it could just be more of the same with the 49ers. And George Kittle actually brought this topic up before when I was looking at an interview he had, I think on the Rich Eisen show. He mentioned that he was confident that Aiyuk was going to come to an agreement with the Niners because it has shown in previous cases with himself, with Deebo he mentioned, and even Nick Bosa, that the 49ers usually take a long time and sometimes carry it, or more often than not, carry it into training camp and very close to the start of the season when it comes to these important players getting contract extensions. So really, the fact that Brandon Aiyuk has requested a trade and that we're about a week from the official start of training camp and no deal has been, ironed out yet, it's almost not news because it's happened already before with these other big players that the 49ers have. It's just almost their way of doing business. They feel confident at the end of the day that they could get something done. And it could be the same case here, but also if we just reference back to the Deebo situation and Nick Bosa situation in particular, I think in those two instances, the 49ers weren't really dealing with the fact that they have to figure out all these other contract extensions right now that they do with Brandon. One, with Deebo, the wide receiver market was nowhere near what it is now. If Deebo was trying to get paid this year, or maybe next year or something like that, it probably would have taken a lot longer than it did because the wide receiver market has just exploded in this offseason. And also with Nick Bosa, they were reluctant to do it, but I feel like they showed more of an urgency when it came to Nick Bosa, that they really didn't want to lose him. And I think with Brandon Aiyuk, I can't be the only one that has noticed that their actions, re-signing Christian McCaffrey, bringing back Juwan Jennings, and things like that, don't matter when you're still trying to figure out something with Brandon Aiyuk. If he sees that, of course, Christian McCaffrey is important. Juwan Jennings played a big role in the Super Bowl and leading up to it. But if you're Brandon Aiyuk, you also put a lot into this team. You contributed a lot to the development of Brock Purdy as well. So if you see these other guys getting paid a lot of money too for a running back in today's market, you're starting to feel a type of way towards the 49ers of why am I taking so long if you're handing out all these other extensions. But, they have other things to deal with. Like I mentioned, other players like Dre Greenlaw, Diamador Lenore is coming up, his contract extension, one of their key secondary pieces. You also have Brock Purdy. Also, he's going to get a lot of money next offseason. When it came to Deebo, George Kittle, and Nick Bosa, you really didn't have to deal with these other markets, especially the quarterback market, because that one's obviously the most expensive one. That's really hindering these negotiations and why I believe this one's a little bit different. It is taking longer like the other ones did, but the difference here is I believe that it just has to do with the circumstance and having to pay Brock Purdy next offseason most likely. hot take, Brock Purdy is the best Mr. Irrelevant. I am not too familiar with, formidable Mr. Irrelevant. I guess that does just help the case for Brock Purdy being the best Mr. Irrelevant. Even though I'm not too familiar with it, I can't imagine too many of them have gone to NFC championships, have gone to the Super Bowl so early on in their career. So it is a hot take, but it's still pretty fair to say, I believe, just because Brock has been drafted into a great situation, has been surrounded with all this talent and credit. Not enough credit goes to Brock Purdy, honestly, in these quarterback conversations. Yeah, his team is stacked, but I believe that he contributes a lot more than a lot of people give him credit for. So it's a hot take, but I would agree with it. I don't think it's that ridiculous to say. But to just close out the situation with Brandon Aiyuk, like I mentioned, with training camp starting next week, this could almost pretty much guarantee that Brandon won't be there if he's already requested a trade. And some other tweets came out after the news from Mike Garafolo. Jeremy Fowler tweeted from one of his sources that Aiyuk wants to be traded or paid, but San Francisco doesn't want to pay him or trade him. So not too much movement there. CBS Sports' Josina Anderson said that New England has actually reached out to the 49ers, but were declined as well. And just to wrap it up, I think the favorites to me still remain the Washington Commanders. The relationship he has with Jaden Daniels, I think, is huge. They spend a lot of time together this offseason. You can't tell me that hasn't played a major part in Brandon Aiyuk with the FaceTime call and spending all that time with him. That doesn't affect him deciding where ideally he wants to play next. And also, I keep saying it, I don't hear anybody else talking about it. Keep an eye on the 49ers, no, not the 49ers, the Commanders' new general manager, Adam Peters. They brought him in from the San Francisco 49ers. He was their assistant general manager in San Francisco. Now he's the official general manager in Washington. So those previous connections, those previous relationships, not only Aiyuk, but members of that organization, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, keep an eye on him. And if a deal does get worked out and Aiyuk is traded, don't be surprised if you see Adam Peters and somebody like Adam Schefter or Mike Garafolo or Ian Rappaport saying that he played a major role in that, because I believe that, going along with Aiyuk spending all his time with Jaden Daniels, and I'm sure Jaden's communicated it to Adam Peters as well, don't be surprised if you see that Adam Peters played a major role in getting this deal over the line. That's my personal hot take on all this. I think that plays a huge role in this, but I don't know. It could be big news. I think it is. I think it just supports my stance that I've been saying all along this offseason, that Aiyuk is going to get traded. I don't see this being resolved. As long as it's taken, I think the writing is clearer and clearer on the wall that the 49ers just simply can't do it. They might want to do it, but with all these other things they have going on, it might not be in their best interest to pay Aiyuk top of the market money if they have to do the same with Brock. They've done it with Debo. They've done it with George. They've done it with Nick Bosa. It just can't physically happen with the salary cap. So we'll see where this goes from now. We'll keep track on it, and I'm sure I'll talk about it in the next episodes. I see a comment. I will get to it after the break. I have to go to a quick break right now, but on the other side, I will address that comment, and also we're going to talk about ESPN's quarterback rankings that just came out. Some surprises, but not too much when they pretty decided quarterback rankings, but we're still going to react and analyze it after the break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.